Hello and welcome back to the Hazzabhajan YouTube channel. It is Harry here and the World Cup is finally over after a month of exciting, crazy, jam-packed, action-filled football in a tournament that is absolutely shrouded in controversy, bribery, human rights issues and all of that kind of stuff. It's finally come to an end. So with that in mind, I thought I would go through each and every team that participated at the World Cup and grade them based on how well they did. So did they supersede expectations? Did they fall below par? Were their players fantastic? Were there any problems within the camp? All of those things and more will be taken into account to give them their score. And if you agree or even disagree with me, you're probably going to disagree with me, to be honest, but if you agree or disagree with me, let me know why down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget, slap a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. But this is going to be a long video, so let's waste no more time and get into how I would grade each of the 32 World Cup teams. The Netherlands, B-. By the way, just in case it wasn't clear, I'm going in the order of where they finished in the groups. So first place in Group A will start, second place in Group A is going to come next, and then the last team that I'm going to profile is the last place team in Group H. I think the Netherlands achieved their minimum expectation of a quarter-final spot, but I don't think they actually played that well. Yes, this Netherlands team is still recovering from the shock of missing out on the World Cup in 2018 and their surprise exit to the Czech Republic at Euro 2020, but there is a lot of quality within their ranks, and advancing from the groups having only really played well against Qatar wasn't exactly convincing. They squeaked past Senegal with 2 late strikes, having been second best throughout, and Ecuador did a number on them to draw 1-1. In fairness, a few of their players, most notably Cody Gakpo and Frankie de Jong, were excellent, and they dominated the USA to win 3-1 in the round of 16 before stunning Argentina with a late comeback in a 2-2 draw in the quarters. Unfortunately, they made the fatal mistake of playing for penalties as Argentina dominated the extra 30-minute period, and lo and behold, they lost on penalties. The future looks bright for this Dutch team, especially as their youngsters continue to improve, but whilst it wasn't a bad tournament for them by any means, they definitely could have shown a little bit more, in my opinion. Senegal, B. Senegal's tournament, despite performing brilliantly throughout the group stages, will be defined by a 30-minute meltdown against England in the round of 16, which saw them concede 3 times and board the next flight home. It's a shame, really, because they pushed the Netherlands all the way and were unlucky to lose 2-0 as a result of 2 Edouard Mendy errors, and then put in brilliant performances against both Qatar and Ecuador, winning 3-1 and 2-1 in those respective games. I think they will be kicking themselves over those 30 minutes of mayhem against England and for failing to keep a clean sheet in any of their 4 games, but the 2022 AFCON winners, who were deprived of their starman Sadio Mane lest we forget, were good fun to watch. And of course, their fans were excellent. Ecuador, B. I honestly think that Ecuador were the best team at these finals who were knocked out in the group stages, and they can be proud of what they achieved in spite of crashing out so early on. They looked assured in a routine win over Qatar and were much the better side in their encounter with the Netherlands, with Moises Caicedo and Pervis Estupiñán running the show. Unfortunately, even though they put up a good fight against Senegal, it wasn't enough and they crashed out, but they didn't disappoint in any of their 3 games. Look out for them in the years to come. Qatar, F. Statistically, morally, and probably literally, the worst host nation of all time. There was a tweet that I saw which summed up Qatar's entire tournament. A guy cashing out his bet on them beating Ecuador after seeing their first pass. In truth, they looked like fish out of water. Despite all the preparations they had made in the 12 years between being awarded the right to host the World Cup and actually playing in it, they were still nowhere near up to scratch, and they have 1 goal and 0 points to show for their $220 billion investment. Their performances were meek, they looked blunt in attack, their defence parted very easily time after time, and the only reason they didn't concede more than the 7 that they actually did let in was because both the Netherlands and Ecuador took their feet firmly off the gas when they went 2-0 up in their respective games against the hosts. A shambolic host nation and a shambolic group stage performance to match. England, B+. You might think this is slightly biased since I am, after all, English, but I think England only had 1 subpar performance, that being their drab 0-0 draw with the USA, which is fewer than can be said for all the other teams who were knocked out in the quarters alongside them. Their other 2 group stage matches were dominant displays in a 6-2 thumping of Iran and a 3-0 success against Wales, before a Jude Bellingham masterclass inspired another 3-0 victory, this time against Senegal, in the round of 16. In their quarter-final clash clash with France, the Three Lions were much the better team following France's opener, with Bukayo Saka and Harry Kane running the show, but ultimately, a poor refereeing performance and a missed Kane penalty proved to be their undoing. For once, I wasn't really angry or devastated about an England defeat. They fell foul to fine margins and a team with immense mental strength who got themselves over the line, which is nothing to be ashamed of really, and the signs look very promising for Euro 2024. USA, B-. I have to say that throughout the group stages, the USA did impress me. They were really good in the first half against Wales and deservedly took the lead through Timothy Weah, and only a moment of madness from Tim Ream prevented them from winning that game. What's more, they were by far and away the better side against England, with their midfield of McKennie and Musa bossing their opponents off the park, and then got through by virtue of a win against Iran, which they more than merited. Unfortunately, their ranking is taken down somewhat by their surrender against the Dutch in the round of 16, which saw them lose 3-1, but they have reasons to be very optimistic ahead of hosting the 2026 World Cup with a young squad that looks set to only get better and better. Iran, D-. For a side who came into this tournament with a reputation of being solid and dogged defensively, it doesn't exactly help when you concede 6 goals in your first game, but that's exactly what happened to Iran. Mind you, in their next 2 games, they would only concede 1 more goal, although that was the deciding goal in their winner-takes-all clash with the USA. Despite a really convincing 2-0 win against Wales in their second game, their tournament will probably be remembered for their fans actively wanting them to fail and then celebrating their group stage exit since the players failed to back protesters in their homeland, campaigning for what can only be described as basic human rights. When that's the defining image of your tournaments, you know it went spectacularly wrong somewhere. Wales, E. I expected more from this Wales team. Honestly, I would say they were only good in one half of football that they played, namely in the second half against the USA, where they equalised after dominating proceedings for a while. However, against an Iran side fresh off the back of a thrashing at the hands of England, they were essentially playing for a draw throughout the match, especially once Wayne Hennessy was rightly sent off, before they deservedly conceded twice in stoppage time. And then, after bigging up the England game for so long, they surrendered to lose 3-0, and with that, their proud record of reaching the knockout stages in every tournament that they participated in came to an end. The nation has a right to be proud of them for making it to the finals in the first place, but have they hit their ceiling? Certainly seems that way. Argentina, A. The newly crowned champions of the world. Argentina have banished the ghost of 1986 by lifting the 3rd World Cup trophy of their history. Did they deserve it? Yeah, probably. That doesn't mean to say that they didn't go through some tough patches though. I mean, they literally lost to Saudi Arabia in their first match, and they blew 2 separate 2-0 leads against the Netherlands in the quarterfinals and France in the final, thanks to some pretty suspect defending and complacency, as well as nearly bottling the final again after Messi put them ahead in extra time. They were undoubtedly dominant in their games against Poland, Australia and Croatia, especially the latter, and the likes of Julian Alvarez, Enzo Fernandez, Alexis McAllister, and of course, the player of the tournament, Lionel Messi, put in individual displays for the ages. At the end of the day, will they care about that infamous loss or nearly surrendering 2 games, not least the final? No. Not a jot. And Messi finally has his hands on the one trophy that has eluded him up to this point, and may well have cemented his status as the greatest of all time. But they don't get an A star because they lost to Saudi Arabia. Simple as. Poland. C. I was never totally convinced by Poland in truth. Everyone thought they would be relying on Robert Lewandowski, but he only struck twice, with one of them being a meaningless consolation penalty in their 3-1 round of 16 defeats against France, and the other following a defensive howler in a 2-0 victory over Saudi Arabia. Instead, it would be left to Wojciech Szczęsny to bail them out, who made a string of top-class saves against Mexico and Argentina, the latter of whom should have scored so much more than just the 2 that they did manage to bag against the Polish, to just about see them through on goal difference ahead of Mexico. However, their shortcomings came to the fore against France, and even though they matched them in the first half, they barely put up a fight in the second half until they were 3-0 down. By which point, of course, it was too late. Mexico. D. I don't think Mexico were a disgrace by any means, but they only really put in a decent showing in their game against Saudi Arabia. They absolutely dominated proceedings and scored twice to give themselves hope, but despite a plethora of chances, they failed to convert any more, and then promptly proceeded to shoot themselves in the foot by conceding late on. They had to rely on the ultimate World Cup man, namely Guillermo Ochoa, who saved a penalty against Lewandowski to preserve a point against Poland, and looked sluggish in a 2-0 defeat against Argentina, who were reeling from a loss to Saudi Arabia and could have been ripe for the picking. Despite seemingly spawning in the round of 16, and then being eliminated in the round of 16, at each of the last 7 tournaments, they broke that streak in Qatar, but not in the way their fans would have hoped. Saudi Arabia. C. How did they manage to blow it so spectacularly? They did the hard part. They beat Argentina 2-1 for crying out loud. The eventual winners of the competition on a 36-game unbeaten streak at the time and the reigning South American champions, yet Saudi Arabia pulled off their game plan to perfection to stun the footballing world. But that was their peak. Despite doing okay against Poland, a couple of defensive mistakes saw them lose 2-0, and then they were second best against Mexico. Albeit they did score late on to send the Mexicans packing. Ultimately, they failed to capitalise on the perfect start, and it should have been so much more. France. A. Did France supersede or meet expectations? I think it's the former, especially given how many of their key players are missing through injury, such as Karim Benzema, Paul Pogba, N'Golo Kante, Christopher Nkunku, and, once the tournament started, Lucas Hernandez. They emphatically broke the holders' curse by becoming the first team to qualify for the knockouts after dominant wins against Australia and Denmark, before a much changed side put in a meek performance in a 1-0 loss to Tunisia. But that didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. They put on a fantastic show in the second half against Poland, looking like true world champions once more, and their phenomenal mental strength saw them over the line against England and a pumped up Morocco, albeit they were probably second best throughout in the former and had multiple scares in the latter game. Then the final came along, and after looking uninspired and, dare I say, pedestrian for 79 minutes, they were given an opportunity to get back into the game and took it through their superstar Kylian Mbappe, the first man since Jeff Hurst to score a hat-trick in a World Cup final and the highest scoring Golden Boot winner at any World Cup with 8 goals to his name since Ronaldo in 2002. However, despite having chances to win it in normal time and in extra time, it would be the mind games of Emiliano Martinez that saw them lose in the cruelest of manners. Ultimately, they put in good performances throughout the tournament, with the likes of Tchouaméni, Griezmann and Varane, plus of course Mbappe, impressing, but they also had excellent game management and knew when it was right to dig in their heels and stifle the opposition or to really go for it, which brought them to within a penalty shootout of immortality. Australia. B. The side who were perhaps the most written off prior to the tournament beginning defied all expectations to make the round of 16 for only their second time in their history after 2006. Yes, they capitulated against taking the lead against France to lose 4-1, but against Tunisia and Denmark, they showcased that Aussie fighting spirit, took the game to both of them, and ended up winning both of those games 1-0. Admittedly, a much stronger Argentina side, helped by a Lionel Messi masterclass, got the better of them in the round of 16. But despite a horrendous Matt Ryan mistake, they kept themselves in contention and nearly equalised right at the death. No matter, they've done their nation proud. Tunisia. C+. The Tunisians had one of everything except points. One win against France, albeit they were guaranteed to finish top so it didn't really matter, one draw against Denmark in which they put in a solid defensive display, and one loss against Australia which ultimately proved to be their undoing, only scoring and conceding 1 goal apiece in the process. Whilst there are undoubtedly areas where they can improve, most notably in attack, I don't think they can be too disheartened by their displays in Qatar, and certainly gave themselves a better fighting chance to progress than many would have predicted. Denmark. E. The fact that I genuinely cannot remember a single good aspect about Denmark's tournament shows how forgettable their performances were. They began with a 0-0 draw against Tunisia in which they were stifled by a stubborn Tunisian backline before coming unstuck against a France side whom they'd beaten twice in the Nations League earlier this year. In their do-or-die game against Australia, they barely put up a fight, were toothless in attack despite having 69% possession, and were caught out on the counter by Matthew Leckie, who sent the Aussies through at their expense. Many tipped them to be dark horses like they were at Euro 2020, but this was ultimately a tournament to forget for the Scandinavians. Japan. B. The biggest enigma of the entire tournament, and by a considerable margin. Japan seemed to thrive on the status of being underdogs, especially when they executed the perfect smash and grab against Germany in their first match to win 2-1. Devastating counter-attacks, excellent performances from the likes of Kaoru Mitoma and Takumi Osano, and a never-say-die attitude caused one of the greatest ever World Cup shocks. before they were brought crashing back down to earth after Costa Rica beat them 1-0. No matter, another stunning comeback victory against Spain saw them top the group, but their record of never having made it past the round of 16 of the World Cup continued, as despite dominating against Croatia, they couldn't find the killer blow and ended up missing 3 of their penalties to lose 3-1 in the shootout. They can definitely leave with their heads held high, having put in some excellent displays, but they will also have that nagging feeling of what might have been. Spain. D. What on earth happened to this Spanish side? The past masters played themselves at their own game and lost. It looks so promising, especially when they absolutely annihilated Costa Rica 7-0 in a game which looked to have signalled their return to the elite level, as they passed their opponents silly and took their chances emphatically. As it turned out though, they peaked in that game, as they were stifled in a 1-1 draw against the Germans and were stunned by Japan, only being spared from elimination by Germany coming from behind to beat Costa Rica. Then came Morocco, in a game of 1,000 passes but just 7 shots across 120 minutes, and only one of them being on target, before they missed all 3 of their penalties in the shootout. Blinded by a supposed cult-like admiration of Luis Enrique and his principles, their refusal to adopt a plan B when they desperately needed one sent them tumbling out of the tournament to the chagrin of nobody. This all means that out of the last 4 World Cup winners, only one of them, namely France, have won a World Cup knockout match since their respective successes, with Spain only having won 3 World Cup matches in total since the 2010 final against Australia, Iran and Costa Rica. What a fall from grace. Germany, D-. Oh dear, my pick to win the whole tournament has gone and let me down big time, as well as the whole nation for the 3rd tournament in a row, since they've only won 3 of their last 11 tournament matches dating back to 2016. Their undoing? Undoubtedly their opening match defeat against Japan, where they got complacent and missed a number of chances before being sucker punched twice on the counter. Yes, they put in a decent showing against Spain, counteracting their passing game and preventing them from gaining a strong foothold in the match, and they eventually found a way to put Costa Rica to the sword. But still. The only reason they didn't get an E was because of the performances of Jamal Musiala, who looks like a superstar in waiting, if he isn't already a superstar, and almost single-handedly dragged the Germans through the groups. Then again, pinning all your hopes on a 19-year-old can't bode well, and so it proved. Schadenfreude, anyone? Costa Rica, D. I didn't expect much from Costa Rica going into the tournament, but I certainly didn't anticipate them being absolutely battered from pillar to post by Spain in a match which really did look like professionals against amateurs. However, they stunned me and the rest of the footballing world by beating Japan and giving Germany a good run for their money, even taking the lead midway through the second half against the former world titans. If I judged them on their final 2 games alone, I'd give them a high C or a low B, but they also lost 7-0, which knocks them down a peg or 2. Morocco, A*, the team of the tournament. I don't care what anyone says. Yes, I know they didn't win it, but that's not the point. What they have achieved is beyond remarkable, not just for themselves as a nation, but for the whole continent of Africa, and the Arab world too. They've become the first African nation to break through that seemingly impenetrable glass ceiling of the World Cup quarter-finals, making Oceania the only continent not to have a nation represented in the World Cup semi-finals. As well as Antarctica, but they don't count. Cameroon couldn't do it in 1990, likewise Senegal in 2002 and Ghana in 2010, but now Morocco has taken the whole continent one giant step closer to the ultimate aim of lifting a World Cup. And that psychological barrier has surely now given way to confidence and belief that very soon we may well see an African team win a World Cup. It's a bit like the sub 4-minute mile. Everyone thought it couldn't be done, but when it was, by Roger Bannister in 1954, 15 other people did it in the next 3 years, and it had been achieved 200 times by 1978. Now that Morocco have reached the World Cup semi-finals, after stunning performances against Belgium, Canada and Portugal, a dogged display against Spain, and a valiant effort in the semi-final against France, it may well be the case that a number of African teams reach that stage over the coming tournaments. The likes of Unahi, Amrabat, Alias Allah, Bunu and Hakimi all covered themselves in glory and became megastars with their incredible performances across the competition, and nobody can ever take this achievement away from them, even if they couldn't replicate their heroics in the 3rd place playoff. Croatia, B+. Morocco's group stage and 3rd place playoff opponents Croatia are up next, and this might be controversial. I think they were a bit lucky to reach the semi-finals in all honesty. They only won 2 games in 90 minutes, a 4-1 victory over Canada in a game where the Canadians looked more dynamic than the Croatians at various stages, as well as the 3rd place playoff, drew with Belgium and Morocco in the groups, and had to rely on incredible performances by Vardial and Dominik Livakovic to keep them in contention. In the knockouts, they were dominated by Japan and had to play for penalties, which they won. Although admittedly, they showed immense mental strength to stifle wave after wave of Brazilian attacks in the quarterfinals and to once again triumph from 12 yards. However, they were put in their place by a ruthless Argentina side who dispatched them 3-0 as the Croatians began to run out of steam. But their midfield, led by Luka Modric of course, put in a number of vintage displays. Their defence was solid as a rock until the semi-finals, and they did come in third, so I guess the positives outweigh the negatives in the end. Belgium. F. Now, statistically, they weren't the worst team at the tournament, but a very compelling case could be made for Belgium having the worst tournament out of anyone who participated, even worse than Qatar. And I'd be inclined to agree. They were outplayed and outgunned by an exuberant Canada side and were lucky to win 1-0 before Kevin De Bruyne's comments about them being too old to win the World Cup led to sarcastic responses by teammates in other press conferences and alleged training ground bust-ups. They were sloppy and trite in their loss to Morocco, with many of their golden generation looking like they didn't want to be there, and when they finally showed some fight in the second half of their 0-0 draw with Croatia, their chances fell to Romelu Lukaku on a day when he clearly wasn't at the races. From third in the tournament and national heroes in 2018 to third in the groups and a national disgrace in 2022. Canada. C. I said in my predictions that this would be one World Cup too soon for the Canadians, and ultimately, I was right. They didn't get a single point in the groups and only scored twice, with one of them being an own goal against Morocco in a 2-1 defeat in their final game, by which point they'd already been eliminated. However, I don't think they did themselves or their reputation any harm, as they were brilliant against Belgium and were unlucky to lose 1-0, and scored really early on against Croatia to give the country a glimmer of hope, before falling apart as soon as their opponents started to gain a foothold in the match. The future is definitely bright for this national team, and with the likes of Alphonso Davies and Kyle Buchanan impressing in Qatar and still very young, they will be much better on home soil, or partial home soil, in 3.5 years' time. For now though, they remain without a World Cup point after 6 games across 2 tournaments, something they will want to rectify ASAP. Brazil. C. This may seem harsh, but Brazil were the favourites going into the tournament and failed to live up to those expectations. They relied on a brilliant Richarlison brace against Serbia and a late Casemiro winner versus Switzerland before they lost to Cameroon in their final group game, albeit they were fielding a weakened team having already booked their place in the second round. However, it looked like the stars were finally aligning as they tore South Korea to shreds in the round of 16, racing into a 4-0 lead by the 36th minute, with Neymar looking like he clicked into gear at the perfect moment. But then, up against a well-oiled Croatia defence, they couldn't find a way to break them down, albeit Dominik Livakovic was in inspired form. Despite taking the lead in extra time, they continued to attack and it cost them, as Croatia countered them and equalised before stunning them in the penalty shootout. This means that Brazil have only reached one semi-final since 2002 and will go at the very least 24 years without winning the World Cup. Meanwhile, they've had to look on as their great rivals Argentina are the ones to finally bring the trophy back to South America. Not ideal. Switzerland. C+. I think Switzerland can definitely be proud of themselves for making it out of the group stages for a 5th successive major tournament, although they've only made it past the first knockout round once in that time. On this occasion, they crashed out after a 6-1 humiliation at the hands of Portugal, which knocks their grade down significantly. Much like with Senegal, they were very good in the group stages, deservedly beating Cameroon, putting up a strong fight against Brazil before losing late on, and playing some beautiful free-flowing football in their clash against Serbia, which helped them win that game 3-2. I was impressed by them whenever I watched them play, especially against the Serbs, where their game management was executed to perfection, right up until that ill-fated round of 16 tie, which will linger long in the memory for all the wrong reasons. Cameroon. C. Normally, Cameroon are the ones who spectacularly implode at World Cup finals, with 2010 and 2014 seeing them eliminated without amassing a single point in the groups. This time around though, things were different. They came unstuck against the Swiss but put in a very good attacking display against Serbia, especially after the introduction of Vincent Aboubakar from the bench to come back from 3-1 down to draw 3-3. Following that, they managed to overcome Brazil thanks to a late Aboubakar winner, although Switzerland's win over Serbia meant that it was immaterial. Nonetheless, it was only their 2nd World Cup win since 1990, and there was no infighting this time around, meaning that whilst their tournament wasn't exactly a success by any means, it certainly wasn't a failure either. Serbia. D-. In attack, Serbia looked menacing and capable of scoring at any time, with the possible exception of their game against Brazil. They scored 3 against Cameroon and a further 2 against Switzerland, with all of them being either instinctive finishes from their front men or the finishing touches to a wonderful move. In defence though, they looked porous and unstable pretty much all the way through, and if you concede 8 goals in 3 games, the chances are you won't make it through. And so it proved. What's more, when they needed some spark against Switzerland after falling behind in that must-win game, they looked scared and nervous, which proved to be their undoing. This was really disappointing from Serbia in all honesty, and they'll look to come back in 2026 a much stronger unit to prove the doubters wrong. Portugal, C+. Going into the tournament, the focus was yet again on Cristiano Ronaldo and his explosive interview with Piers Morgan, which did nothing to appease his teammates. They did manage to put it aside in their first 2 games though, overcoming a determined Ghana side 3-2 in a second half thriller before a solid display against Uruguay saw them emerge 2-0 winners. They lost their final game to South Korea, but they'd already confirmed a spot in the round of 16 by that point, and with Ronaldo finally dropped to the bench, they tore the Swiss a new one by thrashing them 6-1, with surprise star Gonzalo Ramos bagging a hat-trick. Of course, the caveat to all of this is their quarter-final against Morocco, as despite having the entire second half to grab an equaliser against the Arab Lions, they only really fashioned 3 clear-cut chances, all of which they failed to take, and were subsequently eliminated. I think the 3 good games they did have are counteracted by the hyper-focus on Ronaldo, the rancor in the dressing room at the start of the finals, and their capitulation against Morocco. What's more, this image exists. And for Ronaldo, that is the ultimate kick in the teeth, knowing full well that, barring a minor miracle, he will never get his hands on that trophy. South Korea, B-. The shock qualifiers from Group H, South Korea put up an amazing fight in each of their 3 group games despite being, on paper, one of the weakest teams at the finals, who were spearheaded by someone who wasn't quite at 100% fitness just yet, in the form of Son Heung-min. In spite of this, they gave Uruguay a run for their money in a 0-0 draw, almost came from behind to beat Ghana before ultimately losing 3-2, and in yet another group stage shock, they overturned a 1-0 deficit against already qualified Portugal to win 2-1 and book their place in the knockouts. However, they were absolutely dismantled by a rampant Brazil team who scored 4 times in the first half to effectively eliminate the South Koreans by the 36th minute. Regardless, whilst obviously not matching the heroics of 2002, they definitely left with their reputation enhanced rather than diminished. Uruguay, E. Speaking of diminished reputations though, that takes us to Uruguay. At what was meant to be the last dance for the likes of Luis Suarez, Edison Cavani and Diego Godin, with the additions of Fede Valverde, Rodrigo Bentancur and Sergio Roche to their ranks, it looked like it was set up for Uruguay to have a barnstorming tournament. It didn't turn out that way. They struggled to break down the Kim dynasty of South Korea in a 0-0 draw, couldn't take their chances in a 2-0 defeat against Portugal, and even though they did well enough in the first half against Ghana to go 2-0 up, they then got complacent, expecting South Korea to lose against Portugal. But by the time it looked like the Koreans were actually going to win, their key attackers were off the pitch, and their desperate last-ditch attacks proved in vain, and we were left with a crying Suarez and their first group stage elimination since 2002. Ghana, C-. Yes, Ghana came in last in the group, but they were by no means awful at all. Yes, they ultimately let the Demons of 2010 get to their head in their 2-0 loss to Uruguay in their final game, missing a penalty through André Onana and looking toothless in attack throughout the match, but at least they brought the South Americans down with them. That was a shame really, because in their previous 2 games, they looked really strong in attack, giving Portugal a real scare in a 3-2 loss and coming out on top in another 5-goal thriller against South Korea. It's their second consecutive World Cup group stage exit though, but they will definitely come back in 2026, stronger than ever. And that just about wraps up today's video looking at how I would grade each of the 32 World Cup teams. I apologise again for it being a bit longer than most of my normal videos, but there are 32 teams to get through, so I guess that's kind of expected. But if you agree or disagree with any of my gradings, let me know why and what you would grade each of the World Cup teams, well maybe not each of them, but maybe some of them, down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, of course, please don't forget, like it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and you can ring the notification bell to be notified whenever I upload a video straight away. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you then.